Hello, welcome to the Franz van Kat interview. I'm Annette Young. It seems that these days Israel is at a crossroads. The divide between the secular and religious is deepening. This while the Israeli military now finds itself in the West Bank, not battling Palestinian militants, but instead extremist Jewish settlers. And against this backdrop, Israeli author and historian Gershom Gorenberg has just written a book entitled The Unmaking of Israel. He joins me now. Gershom Gorenberg, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
You belong to an extremely small minority, that being a member of the Zionist religious left. Are the bulk of Israelis willing to listen to what you have to say?
Well, I think on the main points that I'm raising, there's a very large portion of the Israeli population that is open to the argument. And the argument is that the ongoing occupation and government support for extreme religious movements is harmful to Israel itself, is undermining Israel's democracy and basic elements of Israel's statehood. Those are not extreme arguments in an Israeli context. What I hope that I've done in this book is provided the historical background, including a large amount of new historical material to back up those arguments and to show the connections between the different threats to Israel's democracy today.
But the reality is, Gershom, that you're probably much closer to a secular Israeli living in Tel Aviv than you would be to an Orthodox Jew living in Jerusalem.
Well, I am an Orthodox Jew living in Jerusalem, and so I would say that I'm able to function in all of those worlds. And one of the advantages that I've had working on this book and on previous books and articles dealing with the realities in the West Bank is that the religious settler movement has, like every religious subgroup, its own language, its own way of relating to the world. And I'm also familiar with that language and therefore able to enter that world and speak to people on their own terms.
But do your fellow religious Jews listen to what you say?
There are some who do. There are some religious Jews who are on the left who are involved in peace movements in the left. But one of the points that I've made in this book is that the connection of the religious community with the far right is actually a product of the ongoing settlement effort and occupation of the West Bank. By supporting the religious settlement movement, the Israeli government has actually encouraged right-wing education within the religious community, has encouraged the idea that Judaism is associated with the settlement effort, with continuing to hold the West Bank. In my view, this is a distortion of Judaism and of Jewish values. And one of my goals in The Unmaking of Israel is to show how this distortion came to be.
And your book talks about how the country is indeed at a crossroads with liberal values under siege. What, in your opinion, needs to be done in order to bring the country back from the brink, as far as you see it?
Well, I think that there are three major areas in which Israel has to act in order to create what I call the Second Israeli Republic, a renewed democracy in Israel. First and probably most central, Israel needs to reach a two-state solution with the Palestinians in order to withdraw from the West Bank and end the settlement enterprise. Normally, within Israeli discourse, leaving the West Bank is presented as a sacrifice of land for the sake of peace. As important as I think peace is, I think that in this context, we must also see peace as a means. It is the way that Israel can safely leave the West Bank in order to restore its own democracy,
Gershom,
to restore its own borders.
And,
yes.
But may I just interrupt and say, but more and more moderates in Israel, including people such as the likes of the former Knesset Speaker, Avraham Berg, and the academic Carlo Stringer, are arguing that the two-state solution is dead and buried.
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that they're mistaken, and I think that when you're speaking of the two-state solution versus the so-called one-state solution, you have to ask where a single state would lead. I think that if tomorrow you had a situation where there was a full political unification of the area between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, full enfranchisement for both Jews and Palestinians, what you would find is, in the best democratic scenario, the next parliament would be split evenly between Jews and Palestinians. In the best case, you would have the political paralysis of a Belgium, and in the worst case, and probably more likely case, you would have two communities unable to cooperate politically and sliding toward Bosnia of the 90s. As difficult as it would be to achieve a two-state solution under the current circumstances, partition, division of the land between a Jewish and a Palestinian state is still the best way of realizing the strong national aspirations of both peoples. Within Israel, the second thing that needs to be done to restore Israeli democracy is to finally effect a division between state and religion, between state and synagogue. The idea of Israel as a Jewish state, in that term, the Jewish state is not parallel to Islamic Republic, it's parallel to Czech Republic, or for that matter, French Republic. It's the idea that Jews are a nationality. The state as a republic, as a democracy, does not need to be connected to religion, and in fact that connection is bad both for religion and for the state.
Oh, Gershom,
And the third
sorry, I'll let you continue.
And the third step, which I think is really essential, is that once there is a two-state solution, once it is clear that we've re-established Israel as a state with a Jewish majority, we also need to ensure the full rights of the Arab minority, of Arab citizens of Israel who make up between a sixth and a fifth of the Israeli population. While protecting and ensuring the rights of the majority and the majority culture, it's also essential to reach a better balance, a more full protection of the rights and culture of the Arab minority.
Gershom, having said all of that, there'd be some who would argue that that's pretty much these days pie-in-the-sky stuff, that many are predicting that the next Knesset, given that Israel is most likely heading into a new election campaign in the next few months, is most likely going to be even more right-wing and even more nationalist than it is at the moment, and that therefore, what are the hopes of a two-state solution being reached under with such a Knesset?
Well, I would say that I've several answers to that. First of all, the only predictable thing in the context of Israeli and Middle Eastern politics is the unexpected. A year ago, we did not expect the uprising in Egypt. A year ago, nobody in Israel predicted the social protests that swept this country last summer. Neither the peace agreement with Egypt nor with the Palestinians was something that the public was expecting only weeks before they took place. So just drawing a line from past trends and assuming that they're going to become more extreme in the future is always a mistake here. The second thing is that since 1992, the pattern of Israeli politics has in fact been not movement in one direction, but a swinging of the pendulum. The extremism of the current government, its attacks on democracy, its attempts to legislate restrictions of rights, could well provoke a backlash, a welcome backlash within the Israeli public. So it would be a mistake to assume that the current direction necessarily has to continue. And thirdly, there's also a role to be played here by the international community and particularly by Europe and the United States. The degree of diplomatic engagement from the outside certainly affects the mood in the Israeli public. An Israeli government which is alienating itself from its key allies in America and in Europe loses popularity. And so there's a message to be made to the Israeli public from leaders in Europe and, of course, in the United States to Israel about the price of the continuation of the Netanyahu government's policies.
Finally, Gershom, and very briefly because we're running out of time, where do you see Israel in 10 years' time?
I will not make predictions. I think that we're exactly at the point of decisions, and the decision is between achieving a more democratic Israel within a two-state solution, or continuing on the current path, which will either lead to an isolated Israel that undemocratically continues to rule over the Palestinians, or to a situation of two national communities, Jews and Palestinians, fighting within one territory between the river and the sea. Israel faces critical choices at the moment, and it's critical for Israel to choose the path of renewed democracy and of peace.
Gershom Gorenberg, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for being with us today. And that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up very shortly.